The Sins of the Father, an original short story by Charlie C.C. Thomas. Bello walked beside Chapter Father Antonio through the streets of Rome, the traffic thinning as people retired with the setting sun at their backs. The wind swam from behind them, tousling their baggy white shirts and disheveling their short hair before they rounded the corner onto the last street, the street the society house was on, the street of his old friend's former home. A chill wound up Bello's back from the wind's touch as he pulled the cotton from his wet skin and wiped his brow. His country clothes would have been cooler for the summer, but when he'd arrived that morning, the society elders made him change to draw less attention. I don't see why, he thought. Sunday Mass held the city prisoner for all my time getting changed, and everyone's personal business kept half of them in their homes. But if not for the Mass, I'd have stuck out like a plague-addled beggar. The manse was tall for its age, and behind a wrought-iron fence capped in points like javelins with thorny hedges neatly kept inside. The gates were taller, arching over the fence with the name of the home inscribed in simple font where the old motto had sat. Chapel House. As they approached the court, a man in simple dress appeared behind the bushes and met them at the gate, opening it with a motion of Father Antonio's hand. "Forgive the silence on the journey," the father said, "but it's best if our affairs aren't overheard." "I understand. May we speak freely here?" Bello asked as the gates were shut, and the father nodded with a grunt under the foreboding windows of the manse. "Father, I know I'm no great asset to your chapter. I'm simple, but no fool. Why have you initiated me so quickly when it took my friend weeks to even be considered, and to put me up in the same manse?" The father laced his fingers at his lap, his clothes as simple and common as Bello's to hide the truth of the powerful magician from the commons. "It's true, Jacobello—" "Bello, please. My friend was Jacobello, not me." They stopped at the center of the court, the stones arranged in what had once been a beautiful mosaic of the icons of the 12 constellations, now worn and bleached from weather and sun. The father nodded. "Very well. Bello, you're not remarkable in the secret arts. Neither was your friend, so far as I could tell, but you're not a common either. There is something of the spark within you, and I can tell you're a determined man. Those of the countryside always make for hard workers. But why we've expedited your admission here is because of your connection to your Jacobello. We began our investigation once we found the doorway in the cellar leading to the sewers, but all his notes were encoded." "And you hope for me to translate them?" "None of us know of it, so we thought perhaps it was something he had used with you, or at least shared. In any case, you knew him, his motivations, so any insight would be of tremendous value." "So he wasn't just another of your initiates or acolytes, then?" Bello asked with a spurn that might have been revealed too soon. The father set his hand on Bello's shoulder and squeezed gently, his face no harder nor softer than before. "All our people are precious for their own purposes, great or small. Each of us have our parts to play, and so often we cycle, each of us, from great to small in the tides of time." Bello forced himself to look down to the man's chest and feign consideration before he sighed and looked up to the old manse, in much better condition than Jacobello had alluded to in his letters. "And giving this place over to me was, for what? To better give me access to the code and clues?" The hand slid away from his shoulder and back to the father's lap as they both faced the house amid the budding flowers hedging the little court. "We gave you this place because we both want to find Jacobello, and having you near the last place he was suspected of going might reveal his fate. You already told us he didn't mention anything in his letters. We suspect he was working on a secret project to impress the elders and move up in rank. Perhaps he had a breakthrough." "And you want to add it to your repository?" "If he's done something without our permission, At his level of training, it could prove dangerous for the commons, perhaps even the entire city. I didn't realize you were so concerned with their well-being. Bello furrowed his brow and looked over his shoulder to the other man, his stubbled face darkly tan and his thick hair black and neatly trimmed like a common laborer. The father smiled. The starry wisdoms are seldom kind to men, but we are still human and concern ourselves with human affairs, as well as inhuman ones. He motioned for the door, and the other man, silent as death, walked around their shadows to climb the steps and hold it open for them. Shall we enter and see your new abode? And what I might glean, of course. Bello chuckled and walked up to the door, the father close behind. Yes, if you would be so kind. They climbed the steps and went into the foyer, the door shutting quietly as the silent man returned to his post. The father led Bello through the ground floor, the kitchen, sitting room, dining room, great room, and library, passing the occasional acolyte as they went about their business in the house. Then they went up the grand stair and through the bedrooms, Jacobello's chambers and the two acolytes investigating his belongings, and finally the study with its 5-man team of investigators. They greeted the chapter father and continued their business, sifting through the notes and organizing them into separate piles on the desk, talking amongst themselves and roving around the room for one book or another from the shelves. A few compared Jacobello's drawings to his journal and the sigils and rituals that might be related. You said you found something else amongst his belongings? Jacobello asked. The father nodded. A series of logbooks and journals were left on the desk beside his notes, claiming to belong to a priest that owned his home a century ago. The alchemist priest, Bello thought. Then he added aloud, Did they? From what we can tell, the documents are authentic and could very well have belonged to that very priest. Of all priests, him I wouldn't have thought to be the nameless magician of popes. The father chuckled to himself as Bello rounded the corner of the desk and put his back to the window. He scanned the neatly stacked pages, settling on a legible one and reading the code, the language they'd made as children in their sleepy old town. Amazing how this has served us all these years, he thought, then asked aloud, How did you organize these if you can't read them? One of the nearby acolytes, a middle-aged woman, found his eyes, her face sharp and eyes sharper. There was already a stack in the center, she said with a clipped voice. So we kept those together. The loose papers were divided into diagrams, sketches, overlapping text, and coherent text. She gestured to each of the piles as she listed off the groups. Do you know anything about this code? Another, a young boy no older than 16, asked, his black eyes deep and far older than his face. The script's obviously Greek, but the cases and tenses look more like Latin, yet almost none of the lexicon resembles either. Bello gestured for the stack they'd found already together, and they gave it, letting him run his fingers over the lines. His eyes darted across the page, reading as fast as he could as he squinted and flipped to the next and back again before continuing, jumping to every third word and trying to understand what he could without being too obvious. It read like a manual, listing off ingredients and positions, calculations for the given time of year and geographical position and time of day. There was something about binding, but it almost repeated itself a few times, binding one type of spirit, then another. He sighed through his nose to look frustrated and flipped through the pages like a deck of cards, resigned to come back for the rest before returning the stack to the desk. What did you get yourself into? He whispered to the air, eyes drifting from the stack to stack. What did you get yourself into? He whispered to the air, eyes drifting from stack to stack, the others nearly mindless ramblings. So you're as clueless as the rest of us, the youth said with a growl, and went back to comparing a page of sigils with a bound book of the same. Gabriel, Chapter Father Antonio said with a soft rebuke, even still, your help in understanding the mind of your dear friend will no doubt prove invaluable to us. He turned to the woman at Bello's right and spoke briefly in Latin before bowing his head. I'm sorry, Bello, but there's some business at the chapter house which requires my attention. Now, your belongings should arrive soon if they haven't already." "His cases are in one of the guest rooms," the young man said, never lifting his eyes from his own notes. "Ah, excellent. I hope you don't mind being in a guest room. Your friend's chambers are still being looked through for clues." "Of course, Father Antonio." With that, the father bowed and went his way, leaving Bello to look through the rooms for his things. He set to work unpacking what could be put away and finished shortly after the sun had set, sitting on the edge of the bed and sighing as he stared at the wall. He thought, "Binding spirits? You told me about the alchemist priest's cache, but why did you need to bind a spirit? Did you call up the dead?" Bello ran his hands down his face, head hanging from his shoulders until he leaned back and fell onto the stale bedsheets. "Did you summon something from the journals the father mentioned? Logbooks and journals. What were in the logs? He told that woman he needed to continue investigating their contents, so there's something worth looking for in them. Were you after the same?" He shut his eyes with a sigh. "But a spirit, or more than one. What kind of creature were you dealing with? But it's been 100 years. What creature can live that long?" Someone knocked on his open door, and he jumped until he sat straight, his curls falling into his face. The young man with old eyes stood there, skinny and hard as Jacobello had been when they were young. Bello put on a smile, brushing his hair away. "Most everyone's leaving for the evening, but a few of us are staying to work through the night." "All right. Thank you for telling me I'll have guests." "We're making supper if you'd like to join us." "Oh, of course. I'll change and then I'll be down." The boy nodded emotionlessly and moved to leave. "And thank you." He stopped and faced Bello, leaning on the doorpost with a small smirk that made him look even more like Jacobello all those years ago. "For what? Looking for your friend? It's kind of my job." "Well, yes, that, but thank you for inviting me to join you. It'll be nice to properly meet my fellows." The boy pushed onto his feet with a wide grin and crossed the distance until he stood in front of Bello. He took Bello's left hand and lifted it from where he sat, examining it before running his thumb over the gold ring on his marriage finger. "Where's your wife?" "Soon to follow." Bello furrowed his brows, but didn't let surprise enter his voice as he watched the boy's face grow wicked. The boy nodded, looking down and finding Bello's face with a lazy lilt to his eye, thumb still playing with his wedding band. "Good. Marriages in the society never withstand the strain of distance." His breath swam into Bello's face like peppermint and cinnamon. "Then it's a good thing she planned to join the society with me." He tried for a smile. The boy stooped close to Bello's face and whispered, "Whether the work or women, or men, the marriages always end in heartbreak. I'd hate to see you just another heartbroken witch." Bello stood, taking his hand back and keeping up a not unkind expression as he said, "I'm a magician and here to be a scholar, not a hedge witch, thank you very much. And thank you for your concern for my wife." The boy smirked up at Bello and stepped back, hand finding his shoulder with a tilt to his head. "My advice is to allow each other your vices, because eventually one of you is going to be too busy for the other, and it'll be better if you're pleased one way or another." "If you'll excuse me, I need to change for dinner," Bello said, taking the boy's hand from his shoulder and dropping it like a dirty rag, face unchanged but eyes blistering. The boy smiled and left, saying playfully, "Join us quickly before all the work's done, or I'll burn your portion, initiate." The mask of Bello's nervous smile fell like a stone as he lifted his left hand and whispered words over his wedding band, turning it between his fingers before shutting the door to put on new clothes. The elder's tests weren't half as bad as that, he thought as he put on a new face for the people that would only get in his way. Let's hope I can finish this before Olympia comes here against my will, lest we both have to fly from this festering pit. 1 week later. Bello walked barefoot through his chambers, slipping into dark clothes with a long coat as the acolytes living in his new home snored and whored themselves to sleep. He looked over his abbreviations of Jacobello's notes on the route through the sewers to the Alchemist's trove, running his finger along the path he'd drawn with references to the city sewer schematics. It had taken him days of constant study under the watchful eyes of that meddlesome boy, constantly feigning ignorance as he wrote out false chart after chart to appease the infatuated creature, all the while plotting his own route and map and committing it to memory. He couldn't have bothered leaving a map behind, Bello thought as he slid a freshly sharpened knife into his sack. He sighed, stashing his notes and map beside the blade and his bottle of herbs. He probably had it on him in the sewers. He scoffed and took up his boots by the strings, shouldering them in his bag as he stared through the floor, ignoring the groans from one of the other guest rooms. "You were always proud," he said, "and quick to act, but you made yourself the fool, Jacobello. I just hope it didn't cost you dearly." He clenched his jaw, brown eyes flicking up under a scowl as he turned with a sigh and crept through his door. He walked on tiptoe past the rooms and down the stairs, tension easing if only by a breath as he half-sprinted through the kitchen and garden to the cellar. He carefully opened it, leaving the door ajar to light the inside as he slipped into his boots and stood before the once secret door to the bowels of Rome. He lit his small candle lamp, the light going everywhere and half blinding him, and took a deep, stale breath before descending the stairs. He fished out the map, flicking to the alchemist symbol in the top right corner as he passed the once neat stack of bricks that had been rearranged to see what remained of the alchemist's message, which wasn't much. He stepped into the putrid air and took a deep breath, shutting his eyes and forcing himself to adjust to the smell. Not so different from manure and chicken scat. He held the map up to the glass-encased candle and looked over the directions, each of the corners and marks taken right from his old friend's accounts apart from the final destination. That could have been one of 3 places. He sighed, counting the hour lines in his candle, 5, and took the same grime-covered steps of his foolish companion. He followed his map and stooped with his candle to find the septagram with dots at each point and the symbol of the earth in the center. He set his jaw and sighed through his nose, nodding and setting back to course. He followed each turn to the next, always stooping to find the alchemist priest's mark in the brick near the floor, hopping over the channel of grey water between the filth-covered walkways, wiping the grime from some of them that had splashed up from surges in the channel. Halfway through the 7 turns he stopped and stood straight at a distant scuff over the brick, like bare feet or hands. He raised the candle, pinching the map with his little finger to reach for the dagger in his bag. There was talk of something in the underbelly and the back alleys of the city, something killing the commons and vagrants, something that tortured its prey like men, but devoured them like a lion. It was probably just a murderer. Even still, he thought, I'll not see myself killed by some common murderer before I find Jacobello, or at least what stole him. He spat on the floor, eyes never leaving the length of the tunnel where the noise had come from, face stern and stony. Something moved in the shadows, invisible eyes, a body shaped like wind, a breath unheard. It was nothing, and the nothing stood out like a giant in a valley. He scowled and breathed a long but simple curse, the words weaving in the air and slithering after that nothing which watched him. The tension in his gut died, his thudding heart eased, but the hard glint in his eyes never left as he put the nothing to his back and followed his map. His legs told him to walk faster, to sprint, to run. But he kept a careful pace and watched for the turns, counting the tunnels as he passed, marking off the septagrams on his map as he found them. Even as he imagined the breath of the lurker on his nape and his hairs stood on end, he only squeezed the handle of the candle lamp and clenched his jaw, whispering another curse after it. After he'd found the 6th septagram, he counted the marks on his candle, 3, and sighed, pleased, though his face wouldn't say so. There were only 3 possibilities to investigate, so he turned down the first option and followed a long tunnel to a dead end, turning around when he didn't find the alchemist's mark nor his motto near the arch of the ceiling, as Bello had said were there. He took the second, and stopped when he found an arrow pointing down a bend to another, and another, following them through the maze of zigzags and hard corners until he came upon a dark tunnel. He shouldered his bag and let the candle drop.
Another dead end and another failure,
something whispered to him.
There's probably nothing interesting there. Best move on to the third path.
He sighed and turned his face the way he'd come, stepping forward with a slouch and checking his candle halfway to the next notch, with a defeated puff of air from his nostrils. He came to the corner with the arrow pointing him to the dead end and darkness, and furrowed his brow with a flurry of blinks. Why did he make those marks if not to lead him back here? He asked the darkness. He didn't mention exhausting all the options in the letter. These arrows aren't crossed out. Maybe he... Bello smirked and returned to the dead-end hall. Maybe you weren't so stupid after all, you goat. He pulled the glass vial of herbs and dagger from his bag, setting the candle down and pricking his thumb as he whispered a simple French spell and swiped it across his tongue. He finished the incantation and shut his eyes, pouring the herbs into his mouth and letting them sit until they mixed with his spit. He took a deep breath, fingers covering his eyes as he bowed and swallowed the bitter, sour concoction. When he rose, turning on his hips like a hinge, he let out his breath and filled the air with burning chemicals until his lungs were empty. He parted his fingers and pulled them away to look with the sight, smiling like a fool at the sigils blazing either side the tunnel. He picked up his candle and leapt over the grey water, slashing his bleeding thumb over the dried blood under the shining lines, whispering a spell of arrest and release before the pale light sputtered and dimmed, leaving only the light of his candle. He stepped into the tunnel, wide enough for 3 men, and found piles of bricks strewn either side of a low hole in the wall. He held the candle up and looked at the intersection of arching ceiling, breathing a sigh of relief at the large alchemist's mark and the motto above. "Be still and know that I am God." He scoffed and said sarcastically, "Humble man, wasn't he?" Then he stooped and crawled under the broken wall into the dark space beyond, turning around to get his bearings. The room was wide as it was long, with tables lining the walls left and right of the entrance, and bookshelves covering the one opposite. Open cubbies in the corners spilled broken glass and platters. Machines and small furnaces sat along the length of the tables, with shelves branching off at the far end lined with dusty bottles and jars. He stepped forward to the center of the room, eyes trailing the shadows of the hundreds of books, titled and not, to the iron door yawning open between them. He crept toward the doorway, foot on the threshold and candle below his face as he peered inside. It was as tall as the room behind him, and round with a domed ceiling. The walls were divided into 7 sections by iron braces, emblazoned with strange incantations, each section dominated by a single sigil encircled by the name of the Hebrew god, all in gold. Silver and golden circles, shapes, and arches filled the rest of the walls, connecting each sigil to one another in a dozen languages, dead, archaic, and living. He blinked and steeled himself to make sure he still looked with the sight. None of the sigils or words of power glowed behind the veil, nor stung the air with the charred ozone of magic that Bello could never sense. He stepped inside, looking down at the septagram covering the floor, golden lines flowing into the walls. He turned all around, candlelight twinkling off the golden silver and mercury in the seam of the floor and wall. He ignored the old dry pile of scat confined to one side of the room and faced the doorway, swallowing as his mind filled the void with an invisible figure. He balled his fists and lifted the candle, banishing the black beyond the door and the dream of a man that wasn't there. He sighed. What was imprisoned here? His voice echoed off the iron walls, devoid of rust or tarnish from the sigils. The power that went into making this cell. Was this what you found, you fool? Was the prisoner what took you? He swallowed and found the pile of scat, no larger than for that of a man. It's only a day's worth, maybe 2. Whatever was in here wasn't being fed, not even by rats. How did it survive? He shivered, hairs standing on end like something was right behind him. He whirled around and found the empty, taunting air. Setting his jaw, he moved through the doorway, whispering as he checked the room was empty. What could live for a century unfed? Maybe it didn't. There are no bones. Maybe Bello took... His words sputtered to breath as his eyes fell on the center of the floor. Black and brown blood sat dry where it had splattered, liters of it, pooled in the center with drag and smear marks from a struggle. But there were no remains, not even a trail from the disposal of the body, only the prints of large bare feet stumbling and sliding in the pool when it was fresh, leading through the walkway. How did I not see them when I entered? He thought. There was no sign of them with the sight, no smell, no lingering heat from the magic. He continued in a whisper. Stupid goat. What did you unleash on yourself? His eyes stung, but not from the sight, not from the herbs, not from the scene of blood. Tears welled and fell down his cheeks. He raised a trembling hand to his lips, breath caught in his throat as he brushed his mouth and let the fingers fall to his gut. They squeezed to a fist, heart skipping beats as his ears roared, but he couldn't look away, couldn't close his eyes, couldn't shut it out. His breath finally came and made him jump as it filled the silence. He swallowed and nodded to himself, taking a shaky step toward the blood and holding his low candle closer. Mourn when you can. Keep your mind about you in the beast's den, he whispered and crouched outside the rim of the pool. He sniffled, wiping the snot from his shaven lip and squinting through the blood to the chalk lines beneath, clearing his throat and blinking the tears away as the constricting ice in his gut unclenched and let him work. With the grief locked away to be released later, he stood and held the candle over the mess, piecing together the shape of the construct until he could see the layers of the protective circle, the triangle facing the iron door with a circle within it as well, the incantations. He flicked around the room, eyes catching half-burned candles, 12 in all, strewn around the dry pool and rolled beneath the tables, each splattered with blood. The magic's gone, he thought. But that's his hand in the chalk. His favorite form for a protective circle. It has to be his. He looked at the footprints again and swallowed, asking aloud, Were you the victim? Or are those your footsteps? He inched after the trail, crouching beneath the wall with the candle in front of his face and illuminating the dark tunnel beyond. He came out and stood with a hushed groan before his eyes settled on the nothing in the darkness where the tunnel met the sewer. His hair stood on end. Shivers ran up and down his spine, his guts twisted, screaming for his legs to bolt and hide him. But where? The darkness of the tunnel, or the darkness of the alchemist priest Cash? Or maybe even the once enchanted cell? He swallowed, staring at the human outline in the shadows, and lifted his candle, settling the twinge in his chest before he let his voice boom against the brick. If someone's lurking in the dark, reveal yourself, prowler. He waited, heart pounding against his ribs and roaring in his ears, but nothing came forth. So he lowered the candle and followed the bloody footprints. They took him into the sewers, lightning as they followed Jacobello's arrows down the maze of sharp turns. What will I tell the society? He thought. Will I tell them anything? They won't know I've come here unless they're spying on me, which could be true. He sighed through his nose. The answers of what he found are probably in the books the father mentioned. That stupid fool wouldn't take them back unless they were promising. His body wriggled with goosebumps, hairs standing on end as the darkness stirred with unfelt breath. He turned, but before he could look back, something slammed into his chest and pinned him against the wall, a hand finding his throat and lifting him off the ground. The candle fell to the floor, glass shattering and fire going out, masking his attacker in darkness. The air stirred in his face, smelling of sweet and savory as the other's face leaned in and smelled him. The tip of the attacker's nose brushed Bello's cheek, their lips dragging together as the other chuckled.
"Oh yes,"
the attacker said low.
"You'll do."
In the time between seconds, Bello's surprise and fear sank like a coal to the bottom of fiery rage. He hadn't lived with strangers and lied for weeks, hadn't fretted over his friend for the past month, hadn't toiled to find the Alchemist cache to be killed or stolen or molested by this brute. He whispered 3 words in a forgotten tongue, and the roof of his mouth ached and stung and burned, what was left of the sight letting him see the glow of the sigil carved into his flesh there. He didn't study the man's face, didn't think, didn't have time. He found the man's shimmering yellow eyes and roared. Heat vomited from the sigil, scorching his tongue and cheeks before it caught fire centimeters beyond his lips in a column of orange flame. The man's face flashed for an instant, sharp angles and bright hair amongst his amber eyes, then it was swallowed in the blaze, casting him back with a splash beside the roar. Bello fell to his feet and staggered back, leaning on the wall as the flames stopped and covered everything in darkness. He fought the urge to scream and crumple under the weight of the searing ache in his mouth, ignored the dribbling streams of warm copper pooling around his tongue and falling from his chin. He turned, hands in his coat pockets as the water splashed and covered him, soaking into his short hair and dribbling down his chest, most of it beating off his coat as he ran for the next corner and dove behind it, pressing into the wall like he could merge with it. He clapped his mouth shut and fought the yelp, pain coming through even the numbness as his heart raced and he fought to stop his panting. Something moved in the water, the man chuckling as he climbed back onto the walkway and padded the way Bello had come.
"Fire magic's dangerous for a little creature like you,"
the man said before he snickered and stopped with a sigh.
"I like your spirit, boy. Few magicians have the instinct to fight to survive. Just put others in harm's way to save themselves. Very resourceful, having a sigil in your mouth. My father would be proud. Earthly and infernal."
The man stepped closer, Bello's heart pounding against his chest as the darkness burned away with gentle candlelight, closer than he'd thought the attacker was. He swallowed and sat up straight, coat dragging the bricks in what might as well have been a scream. He pulled the sealed glass vial from his pocket, panting through the blood soaking into his white shirt. He wrapped his hand around it and leaned to the side, the edge of his eye peeking around the corner. Nothing. The man was gone. Bello furrowed his brow and stared, ears perked for a small eternity before he shuffled onto his feet and came around the corner, gaze fixed on what was left of his little candle. He stepped closer, and movement pulled his face up to the ceiling and the pale, naked man hanging from it like an insect. Bello froze, eyes wide and feet cemented as the man scuttled on his belly, limbs bent unnaturally. He stopped in front of Bello and tipped his head back, long blonde hair falling in a greasy cascade, stubble painted across his amused face.
"I knew you were like the other the moment I found you walking the trail of arrows," the man said and quirked his head. "You're after my father's repository, a knowledge-hunting magician. But you're more like the others that have searched these tunnels. You're mature, patient, quiet, not like the one who released me. He was loud as a screaming babe."
"Jacobello?" Bello said in a small voice, taking a step back. The man-creature smiled kindly and twisted like an ape in the trees until his feet let go of the ceiling and he spun, landing in a crouch. He stood until he couldn't, hunching under the ceiling, more than a head taller than Bello or any man.
"Yes,"
he said gently.
"I believe that's what the demon called him. You must forgive me. I wasn't quite myself at the time."
"What? You were what he was after?"
"Of course," he said, hands on his naked hips. "Homunculi are a rare thing to you people, aren't we? Very precious."
Bello took another step back, swallowing and wincing. "You're... what did you do to him?" The man had the decency to look ashamed.
"As I said, I wasn't myself. Locked in a box for a century will do that. I was rather hungry, you see."
"You ate him!" Bello roared. Fire sparked in his veins again, eyes wet for the pain in his mouth and heart.
"I don't remember it, in truth. I was in a hunger trance."
The man smiled and shook his head.
"But that's in the past."
"You're the thing killing people in the sewers, so I'd say it's right here in the present." The man stared at Bello, smirking at his growl. He sighed, then his hand went around Bello's throat, lifting him to his face.
"I wouldn't try your fire trick again unless you'd rather die by self-immolation. Now listen to me, little magician. I don't have time for games, so I'll be blunt. I have business needs attending, and I need to know how to leave here."
Bello thrashed and kicked, hands clawing at the thick wrists, but the man's body was solid muscle, like he were chiseled of stone. "You've left before. Go there. Release me." He gasped, and the man's grip tightened until the pressure in Bello's head built and throbbed in his skull.
"That's not where I want to go. You've come from my father's home, like the one who freed me. I can smell the old enchantments on you. I can see the little shades at your back. Take me there."
He opened his hand, and Bello dropped, crumpling to his hands and knees as he rubbed his throat, coughing.
"Take me there, and I'll let you live. I may even give you a reward."
Bello looked up at the mountain smiling down at him and coughed again, splattering his filthy legs with blood and spit from his charred, split lips. The man crouched and pinched Bello's chin with his forefinger and thumb, bringing their mouths together. Bello pushed back with a swallowed shout of protest, but the man grabbed his nape and dug long nails into his skin. Bello screamed, and the man's tongue slithered inside, lapping up his blood and scraping over the mangled flesh. Then he rushed back. Blood painted across his face, tainting his smile as Bello fell back to his haunches and scuttled away. But when his other hand found his mouth, and his tongue moved over the wounds, he couldn't find them. He moved his jaw and stretched his lips, and there was no pain.
"There. Now do you see? I can repay you for your services. Take the offer. My bribe is much more fulfilling than my threat, though I'll enjoy both. So make your choice."
"Why do you want to go to the alchemist's house?" Bello slowly stood, their eyes fixed on one another.
"The alchemist was my mortal father. I have business there and elsewhere. But I wish to see the former done first."
"He was your father?"
"Ah, I see. Knowledge. Come, little magician, guide me, and I'll answer all your questions."
The man gestured to the next arrow in the corner opposite the one Bello had hidden behind, smiling in a way that would be infectious under better circumstances. Bello rubbed his throat, eyeing the creature as he coughed and slowly rose to his feet. "My other option being you steal my map and kill me?"
"You have a map? Well, in that case, no—"
Bello shoved his arm into his bag, soaked with gray water, and pulled out the wad of damp paper, the ink bleeding over the page like a child's painting. The man stopped and tilted his head, the mask falling away for an instant, dreary, tired eyes over an expressionless countenance. "You're going to need me to take you if you ever want to see that house again," Bello said, "thanks to your fruitless splashing earlier."
"Or I could hold you hostage and feast on your flesh for weeks until another stupid soul comes down here looking for you, just as you have for your stupid goat. Is that what you call Jacobello?"
It smirked. "Don't change the subject, creature." His voice ricocheted off the walls, but the man didn't move. "You have urgent business. Well, I'll take you, so long as I live after the venture and you reveal to me what you did with my friend's bones." The man lifted one eyebrow and smiled, a wide, genuine thing that made his face look angelic.
"I knew I liked you, little magician. Fine. In exchange for leading me back to my childhood home, from which you've come, I shall reveal the location of your friend's remains and shan't kill you along the journey nor thereafter."
Bello pulled the dagger from his dripping sack and slashed it across his palm. "Swear it in blood or not at all, creature." He smiled and held out his hand, palm up. Bello hesitantly set the blade to the soft flesh and pressed, but there was no blood. They found each other's eyes, and the creature laughed.
"Try again, magician. I'll let myself bleed this time."
Bello did, and the creature's blood flowed red as a man's. Then they repeated their vows, clasping hands and ending with the consequential curses. "Lest your strength become your weakness, and all that might please you become bitter, and make you vomit until you wither and wish you could die," Bello said.
"Lest I take you in my hands and make of your flesh whatsoever I desire, and then consume you, living and screaming."
They glared at one another, then opened their hands. Bello wrapped his in a spare cloth, refusing the creature its healing touch, and fetched a candle from his bag, tossing it to the man.
"I have no need of this."
"You may be at home in darkness, but I am not," Bello glowered as he stood by the arrowed corner, the man almost entirely eclipsed in the shadow of the dying candle. "After all, fire magic's dangerous for my kind, isn't it?" The man smirked and swiped his hand up the length of the candle, fingers shielding the light as the wick caught without so much as a breath of incantation. His body glowed in the warm light, white as milk and covered in specks of filth, muscles great and rippling, face angular, hard, and soft all at once. He took his hand away and gave the candle to Bello, who took it and turned before the man could catch him studying his flesh. They walked from arrow to arrow in near silence until Bello sighed. "Will you not release your knowledge to me?"
"Ask, and I shall tell you, little magician. You know, I don't like titles. Tell me your name."
"Tell me yours, the one your alchemist father gave you."
"Samael."
Bello stopped for a moment as the world reverberated in his skull, then started up his slow, careful stride. "Satan. That would make sense."
"Not Satan. His name before the fall."
"So says the Church. There is no such name in Scripture."
"Ah, so you doubt the authority of the Church."
"I'm an alchemist, a magician. The Church tolerates us to help them solve things they cannot, or refuse to debase themselves to satiate their curiosity."
"Unlike my father,"
Samael said with a chuckle.
"He risked damnation, broke the holy ordinance of heaven, to do many things in the pursuit of knowledge. And then he created me."
"How could he have?"
"My creation? It was simple. He bound an unholy archangel to a whore he'd impregnated, but couldn't banish him, he being my infernal father. 9 months later, suckling at the teat of the evil spirit, I was born and grew quickly."
"Why create you?" Bello asked as they rounded the penultimate arrowed corner.
"Why did your friend search out my father's works? Why did you accept my offer of knowledge, even at the possible toll of the lives of Rome I might reap? Power."
"Not all men seek power," Samael scoffed.
"All men seek something to make them powerful, because all men are powerless, especially magicians."
"We, who summon the elements and command the starry wisdom to manipulate chemicals and summon spirits both dead and not?"
"You who may do so by enslaving yourselves to the will of fallen spirits."
Samael leaned close, his breath falling heavy over Bello's nape, making his skin crawl.
"You who are so easily tempted to forsake the light you need to live."
"Why do you delight in torment?" Bello spat over the other's words. Samael chuckled and lifted away.
"It's my nature, as it is yours to be inquisitive. I am the son of a fallen angel and a whore. Did you think I would have a pious soul?"
He barked a laugh.
"In truth, I have no soul. My carnal father even wrote so in his notes."
"He feared you, then?"
"Feared, yes. Hated also. He attempted my life hundreds of times."
He sighed.
"I miss our games."
"Yet you're not dead?" Bello asked, looking over his shoulder as they rounded the last corner of the zigzag maze and into the bowels of the city.
"I cannot die. I cannot be wounded lest I wish it, and then it will heal swiftly.
Poison is as wine, venom as a drug. Even incantations cannot undo me, for I shall undress them with my fingers and turn them to my own purposes." He leaned into Bello's ear, hands at his waist. Bello spun and scowled. "Do not touch me as if I were some woman for you to shame. Do not touch me at all." Samael smiled and pulled his hands away, stepping back so Bello could see all of him as the creature groped himself. "You must forgive me. It's been some time since I've encountered a creature as fiery as yourself, and you're not at all unhandsome." "Silence!" Bello growled, his gut churning as Samael smirked and took his hand away from his manhood. Bello turned and continued with a quicker pace before a thought smacked him from behind. He chuckled and slowed. "Do not think that I can be so easily manipulated, creature. I shall not let you disturb me into walking faster than my pace, to bring you home quicker and release you of your vow to reveal anything I ask." Samael chuckled, the wind rushing behind Bello as he whispered in his ear, "You're too clever for me, little magician. Too clever indeed." "What are you?" Bello asked before hopping the gray water to continue on the left side of the tunnel and turn. "My father thought me a homunculus. I am not." "Born of a fallen angel and a woman. One of the men of renown?" "Very good," Samael praised as Bello stopped and stooped to find the alchemist's mark. "Even among the magicians of my time it was forbidden to craft us." Bello stood, looking down the left and right tunnel until memory struck him and he followed the right path. "Can you blame us? Your kin were the tyrant god-kings at the dawn of man that ate our children for entertainment." "Well, we wouldn't want that to happen again, would we?" "I do not," Bello said, "but I'm sure you do." "I want only what's due me." "Praise, worship, and power." Samael chuckled. "I am not a man. I don't need to seek power which I already possess." "The power to move spheres is great, but if not for the recognition of man, what does it matter? Your own delight? Build a house and be pleased, yet none shall live therein. Build a wall, and be there no people, none shall be contained. Till a field and grow a great harvest, but be there no mouths, to what purpose was it grown but to rot?" There was silence for a moment. Then Samael said low, "Ask another question. The silence offends me." Bello allowed himself to grin, but he didn't let it enter his voice. "Where is Jacobello?" He looked over his shoulder, eyes burning before he looked back at the next junction. "I shall reveal his bones when I stand in my father's house again. Another." Bello sighed. "Then what of your parentage?" "My father's name is unknown, as is my mother's. He's a fallen archangel of the god of this world, and she a whore, whom my carnal father could not resist." "What of his patronage, your father?" Bello stooped and found the mark, then froze, swallowing. "If I were to say I was lost, I could lead him astray and escape. And I could get more knowledge from him as well." "Something the matter, little magician?" Bello looked between the left and right turns of the intersection, furrowing his brow. I think it's this way." He pointed down the wrong tunnel. "You think, or you know?" Bello licked his lips, flicking from Samael to the tunnel and back, silence weaving between them until he pointed down the wrong tunnel. Samael grabbed Bello's arm before he could reach the gray water and spun him until they faced one another, the yellow eyes and long teeth glinting in the candlelight. "You cannot kill me for the pact!" Bello shouted, struggling against Samael's grip. "And if you've broken the pact by leading me astray, then I shall have my way with you, in all ways, before I consume you." Samael scowled, his beautiful face twisting into something frightful before he smirked and pressed Bello's back onto the ground, crawling over him. "Do you lead me astray, little magician?" Samael mounted him, pressing himself against Bello's thigh. "I remember! It's the other way!" Bello pushed, skidding back with his hands and feet away from the giant and nearly falling into the channel. He panted, grabbing the candle and scurrying the way he'd first come, swallowing, hoping for silence as Samael chuckled. On second thought, better to just get this done and be far away from him, Bello thought. I'll collect Jacobello's bones and take Olympia and flee. My father, Bello jumped and nearly dropped his candle, had no patronage. No angel nor saint is head over one thing or another. That is something by which the church is deluded. By your cousins, no doubt. Bello's hand went to his chest as he tried to calm his heart. There was no need. Man called and my brethren answered. They had no need to begin the deception, only encourage what man desires. Power for oneself and control likened the one enthroned on high. Samael chuckled. Magic is a good resemblance for such, no? They walked the rest of the time in silence until the penultimate mark. Then Bello asked, Your business? I question whether I should even ask. Samael chuckled. I've searched for my mother for many years. I've known she was trapped by my carnal father for the spirit within her, but I didn't know her whereabouts until shortly before I was imprisoned by him. I shall find her. Why, no, I suppose that's obvious enough. How, then, did your father ensnare you? He hummed. Very much in the way you ensnared me with your questions. He knew I only craved the flesh of men, but my hunts were drawing too much unwanted attention. He lured me into these tunnels and brought me to his repository, told me it would all be mine to carry when he died, and that I could use these tunnels for hunting and playing with my prey. I didn't have the chance to learn their layout, though. That very night, he asked my opinion of the cell to hold his experiments should they become uncontrollable, something I discerned immediately. I inspected the interior. I knew he would try to trap me, but when he shut the door, I didn't expect it to hold me. I suppose you don't know how your father died, then? No, but I could hear him bricking off the repository. He lived long enough to do that. Was it age or accident or his craft that killed him? Bello shrugged as they rounded the final turn to the dead end and the broken wall that would take them to the cellar. No one knows. I'd hoped you might. Samael chuckled as they passed the neatly arranged bricks with their broken warning. Another thing for me to find, then. They climbed the stairs to the cellar and came into the garden, Samael groaning with a smile. Bello turned and stepped back, eyes traveling up and higher as the other rose to his full height, 2 or even 3 heads taller than a man. Then his eyes flitted over the scarless, hairless skin speckled in black and brown from his hands and feet up. Aside from the filth, Samael glistened under the moonlight like wet marble, his hair like muddled gold, his eyes like embers. If not for his motions, Samael could have been called a statue. The garden, Samael said, turning and stretching his face up to breathe the night air. He spread his arms as goosebumps ran over his bare skin. Father never did half as well tending to plants. These must have come after. He chuckled, opening his burning eyes to the stars. One never thinks about missing the sky. It's been so long I almost forgot what the constellations looked like. What it was to be bathed naked in moonlight. He groaned with a laugh, then faced Bello. Well, Bello said, we're here. Where's Jacobello's remains? Straight to business, I see. Is there no room in that head of yours for fun? Samael stepped closer, kneeling to look up at Bello, his face almost like silver beneath the moon. I could show you things you haven't dreamt of. I'm a creature of pain, but I understand what men can endure, and what makes them rise to the occasion. His hand found Bello's thigh. Bello scowled and batted it away, stepping back as he lifted his left hand, the wedding band glinting gold. Even if I weren't bound to another, I don't consort with demons. A simple band of gold. Would you really deny your heart for that? Samael stood, smirking beneath furrowed brows. I rather like your spirit, boy. I think I'd rather have you with me
if you'll come. Or maybe even if not.
The bounds of our pact forbid you to harm me.
To kill you. I may kidnap you if it pleases me. I may do to you as I wish now that our pact's fulfilled. Why shan't I make you a bride of my own?
Samael stepped closer, and Bello raised his free hand, the sealed glass bottle between his fingers. Back! You've been given your desire, now uphold your oath and deliver the location of Jacobello's remains to me, or suffer the doom of your own magic.
What is that?
Insurance. The location. Bello barked up at the giant, his face a scowl. If you attempt my abduction or harm, this will wreathe you in flames even water cannot extinguish. The location! Samael sighed with a smirk and stepped back, hands on his narrow hips.
Return to the path before the repository and turn left. Follow the way straightly beyond 7 turns. Then turn right, then left. Go straight past 2 turns and you'll find a ladder. Ignore this and go into the tunnel just after it. There you'll find a wax-and-sealed wooden box with his bones inside.
He smiled wide, flashing long, sharp teeth like a wolf beneath his burning eyes.
There. Our pact is truly done.
And what shall you do? Bello adjusted his stance, eyes daring up from under his brow. Samael grinned and looked up at the old man's behind.
I answer you not for the power in your hand, nor that of the pact, but for my own pride.
His eyes sank into Bello's, and the mortal man stepped back again, body taut and lax in an instant, ready for a blow.
Because you interest me, little magician, I shall recommend you never enter those walls again. And, so that you have reason to live and not draw the ire of your society of fools, run this night, and tell your people that it was me who destroyed this house, and I make my way to the palace of holy men.
Destroy? It stands short. Samael set a clawed finger to Bello's lips with a pouting grin and tilt of his head.
Hush now. You must away so that your masters can give chase before I reach the Vatican.
Why,
the thrill of the hunt is intoxicating, and magicians make the best prey. They can fight with more power than any common man, but they taste just as sweet.
Samael leaned close and set his supple lips to Bello's forehead.
I give you your life this night. Make it worth my while to watch.
Then the place he'd been was replaced with air, as wind knocked Bello back to sprawl on the ground. He flipped onto his side and scrambled to his feet as Samael moved around the house in a series of blurs, almost fast enough to look like he was instantly transported across the yard. Bello's arm fell as his lips parted, eyes wide as the stunning creature ran and tore the face of the manse away with its claws. Layer by layer it was dismantled from without. Then came the waking acolytes. Samael barked an inhuman laugh and leapt, scuttling up the now rough wall like an insect and hurtling through a window. Someone screamed. Curses, shrieks, spells were all cut short. Then the inside glowed with warm light that swelled as Samael was blasted before Bello's feet, the back door splintering around him. He snorted, steam rising off his skin and smoke billowing from his nostrils as he growled and rose from hand and knee to clawed feet, towering over Bello and panting beneath his open fangs.
Leave, little magician, and deliver my message lest the flames consume you as well.
Samael turned and faced the young man, Gabriel, naked and covered in soot, his eyes like diamonds surrounded by black. He raised his hands, veins bulging under his skin and voice breaking as he spoke an incantation. The air stung Bello's nose as blood wept from the boy's eyes and mouth, his muscles pulsing as he fought to hold his stance under the weight of the incantation. Bello's hairs stood on end. He gasped with wide eyes and bolted across the garden after the first roll of thunder, but Samael only chuckled and opened his arms. Bello dove, hands on his ears as the sky roared and lightning crashed into the pale giant, sending up clods of scorched earth. He sat up, rolling his jaw until his ears popped and stared, wide-eyed and panting, as Samael stepped out of the crater, took a wide stance, and vomited a column of heat The air shimmered like a mirage as it flew toward the house, the grass and trees around it shriveling and catching fire. The garden screamed and popped as all its moisture left in an instant. Then the boy gasped, turned to run, and his naked skin exploded in flames along with the kitchen's. The boy screamed and writhed on his feet as Samael laughed and tilted his head, groaning as he waved his hands, the flames moving with him. He sauntered closer, waving the flames higher, hotter, cackling as the boy crumpled to his knees and writhed on the floor, his words dying around the screams. The demon looked over his shoulder and smirked, turning enough to the side to expose his stiffened manhood.
"Leave, magician. Unless you care to stay and watch me have my fun."
He smiled too wide for a human face, teeth too sharp for a man, eyes blazing like the flames as his golden hair whipped in their dry wind. He grabbed his manhood and chuckled low, like it came from the earth, before returning to the screaming boy.
"Oh, no, no, no. You can't run away. We've only just started."
Bello leapt up and ran around the manse, stumbling over the rose bushes and crawling through the thorns, blood flying from his skin as he fell into the gate's iron bars. He pushed and thrashed against it, but the key was inside. He looked over his shoulder as the flames climbed high into the sky, bursting through the windows and groping throughout the manse. The boy screamed like a wild beast, overtaking the roar of the flames as Samael howled and laughed. Bello's wide eyes went wider as he leapt onto the bars, scaling them up faster than he could have when he was a boy. He fell hard onto his shoulder with a gasp and rolled onto the street, fumbling to his feet as people screamed from their windows and called out for the fire. He cradled his arm as the throb began, but he couldn't sit and watch the flames, couldn't put them out. He ran. His heart pounded in his chest as spit burst from his healed lips with each breath like a snorting horse. He raced through the streets for the chapter house, for the fathers, for the elders. The beast was free, and it would bring its destruction to the heart of Rome, to the hearts of men. Hey y'all, just wanted to put a little note here at the end given some of the contentious nature of the subject matter discussed here. The views about the church and Christianity as a whole, which are discussed by the characters Samael and Bello, they do not represent my own views, nor even necessarily those of the church. These are simply just fictional views. And especially given that one of these characters is an incarnate demon and the other is a self-professed magician, their opinions on the matter should be taken with a block of salt, not just a pinch. Anyway, now that the disclaimer, I guess, is out of the way, normal message. Like, comment, and subscribe if it behooves you. If it doesn't, then I guess don't. In either case, I'll see y'all next time. Bye.